The snow didn't fall so much as float, like it had nowhere better to be. It was Christmas Eve in Boston, and the Charles River wore a skin of gray ice that groaned whenever the wind slipped across it. Runners had gone home. Rowers were long gone. The footpath along the esplanade belonged to cold and quiet. Avery Bennett did not believe in quiet. Her phone pulsed in her pocket calendar alerts. A dozen Merry Christmas texts, 3 unread messages from a board chair who never slept. She didn't answer any of them. She just walked, leather boots crunching salt crystals, breath clouding in front of her like she was exhaling ghosts. The city behind her glowed, Beacon Street windows, garlands, a brownstone stoop with a lopsided wreath, families, music, light. Boston hummed. Avery, as usual, did not. Up ahead, a bench by the river cut a clean line against white. She almost passed it, then stopped. Something on the ground wasn't snow. 2 small shapes tucked into the windbreak, one wrapped around the other. Avery's brain did what it always did first: assess, calculate, decide. A pile of coats? A backpack? A trick? The smaller figure twitched. "Hey," Avery said carefully, voice low like approaching a frightened dog. "You okay?" The bigger shape lifted its head. A boy 7, maybe 8, hazel eyes too old for that face. His cheeks were wind-chapped. A knit beanie clung to uneven hair, like it had been pulled on fast. He didn't answer. Then Avery saw what he was holding. A baby, barely, 10 months maybe, wrapped in a tired blanket the color of old bubble gum. Her cheeks were mottled from cold, her breath shallow. Around the tiny neck faint, yellow-purple shadows. Avery's heart hit a wall. "Oh, God!" She crouched, knees burning through denim. "I'm Avery. What's your name?" The boy's mouth moved once before sound arrived. "Lucas? And this is?" Avery kept her hands visible. "Ivy," he whispered, holding the baby closer. Then, like he had rehearsed the words, "Don't take us back." The river moaned under ice. Somewhere, a car horn bleated and quit. Avery swallowed hard against the taste of metal in her mouth. "I'm not taking you back," she said, voice steady. "I'm taking you somewhere warm." Lucas didn't move. Avery shrugged off her navy peacoat and wrapped it around both kids, tucking it under their legs the way she'd seen NICU nurses swaddle. She slid one arm under Lucas, the other under the baby. Lucas refused to let go, so she lifted them both, breath leaving her in a white sheet. Her Escalade waited by a snowbank on Starro. Heated leather had never felt undeserved before. Tonight it did. As Avery eased them into the back seat, the baby stirred. She didn't cry. She made a small sound like a hinge trying not to squeak, and nuzzled into Lucas's chest. That's when Avery saw it hanging from the boy's neck on a frayed ribbon. A locket, oval, scratched, stubborn. When Lucas shifted, it flipped, and in the dull glow of the dome light, she caught a reflection of something that looked like a sunflower. Her breath stuttered. Jenna had loved sunflowers. She closed the door with a soft click, because if she slammed it, everything would break. Hospital, she told herself. No. She pulled into traffic, blood buzzing, vision narrowing. On the first red light, she finally let herself look long enough to be afraid. The boy's eyes weren't just old. They were familiar. The Beacon Diner did not care that it was Christmas Eve. It cared about coffee, soup, and the Red Sox schedule pinned crookily above the register. Avery slid into a back booth with the kids. Steam sloshed from 3 chipped mugs. Cocoa for Lucas. Warm milk for Ivy in a takeout cup with a pierced lid and a prayer. Chicken noodle for Avery, who would not taste it. Her coat swallowed Lucas to the chin. Ivy's tiny fist had found the edge of the blanket and refused to surrender. "What happened?" Avery asked, careful. Lucas watched the spoon like it was a snake. His eyes flicked to Ivy and back. "My uncle. He gets mad. He says Ivy cries on purpose. He says I talk too much. His mouth stopped working. His chest kept going. Avery slid the cocoa closer. "Drink," she murmured. Slow. He obeyed like it was a test. Where's your mom, Lucas? His lips pressed white. She got tired. She slept and slept. The sentence was a blade wrapped in cotton. Avery had to set her spoon down. Do you know your mom's name? He nodded. Jenna. Her fingers went cold around the mug. Morales? She heard herself ask and had to concentrate to keep the words from falling apart. Lucas blinked. Jenna Morales Bennett. She said sometimes she used both. Avery's body remembered the name faster than her mind did. Jenna, with a sunflower behind one ear. Jenna in canvas sneakers. Feet on the dash of a borrowed car. Jenna saying, Bennett, like you, dummy, and laughing. Avery hadn't seen her in years. Not after that winter. They both stayed in Boston and made big plans under small lights. Not after. Avery took a job that ate months like popcorn, and Jenna moved to Worcester, just for a while. Not after a voicemail. Avery hadn't returned because she was in a meeting that felt essential at the time and ridiculous now. Avery stared at the locket. Can I? Lucas hesitated, then set Ivy in the corner of the booth and slid the ribbon over his head. He placed the locket in Avery's palm, like it was an animal that might scare. The hinge stuck, then yielded. Inside, a faded photo of a sunflower. And in the opposite oval, cut small to fit, two faces Avery knew the way you know your own handwriting. Hers and Jenna's. Foreheads bumped together. Summer behind them. Happiness you couldn't fake if you tried. The diner's lights felt too bright. Avery closed the locket carefully and returned it. Thank you. Lucas didn't smile. Mom said if anything bad happened, find Avery. She said Avery knows what to do. His voice didn't change. I didn't know where that was, so I came to the river. She liked the river. Avery had never been a religious woman, but she bowed her head over that bowl of soup and for the first time in a long time asked for help. Okay, she said finally. We're going to the hospital. Then we'll figure the rest out. Lucas's shoulders didn't drop, but his eyes did. They softened, just a fraction, enough to make room for hope. St. Elizabeth's E had seen everything. It had never seen Avery Bennett with a baby on her shoulder and an 8-year-old welded to her hip. Nurses did not ask unnecessary questions. Pediatric beds appeared. Warm blankets swallowed cold limbs. Dr. Patel, eyes kind behind tired glasses, lifted Ivy's chin and frowned at what he found. These bruises are in different stages of healing, he said softly. We'll run labs, but she's been hurt more than once. Avery nodded. We're not taking her back. Rosa Alvarez from CPS arrived in a navy wool coat with a clipboard and a look that said, I will protect these kids even if it means arguing with a hurricane. She took notes. She spoke gently to Lucas. She watched Avery with the caution of a person who had met every type of savior and learned most of them were tourists. Relationship to the children? Rosa asked. Avery opened her mouth and stopped. She could say, friend of the family, which was true and not. College roommate of the mother. True. Insufficient. She tried a different truth. I loved their mother. I didn't show it very well. I'm trying to do better now. Rosa's pen paused. Something softened. Okay, Rosa said. We'll file for emergency custody with you as temporary caregiver until a hearing. If the uncle shows up, call 911. Do not engage. Understood. Avery signed forms like she was signing a peace treaty. Lucas drew a picture of a boat with 3 stick figures holding on while the river pushed. Ivy slept with her mouth open, like she'd been running 10 months, and finally sat down. At 2:17 a.m., under lights that pretended it was day, Rosa set a folder on the counter. Judge Albright granted emergency placement with you, Miss Bennett. We'll do a home check in 72 hours. Home, Avery repeated, tasting the word like it might expire. Lucas stood at the doorway, holding Ivy's diaper bag, which wasn't a bag at all, just a grocery sack with 3 diapers, and a bottle with no top. He looked at Avery. He didn't say, please don't take us back. He didn't have to. Avery bent to his eye level. I'm not going anywhere, she said. And neither are you. For the first time, Lucas nodded like he believed her. Morning came slowly, as if Boston were afraid to move too fast and scare away the quiet. Pale light slid between the blinds of Avery's Back Bay condo and laid itself across a living room that had never learned the difference between clean and welcoming. Avery stood barefoot in the kitchen, hair pulled into a knot that didn't quite hold, watching the kettle begin to fuss on the stove. Her place was glass and steel, and all the straight lines you draw when you're trying not to think about curves. Metal stools, a concrete table, art on the walls that never asked to be touched. Behind her, a sound the condo didn't recognize, a baby's laugh round and surprised, like the world had told a joke just for her. Then a thump, thump, thump across the hallway and a whisper shout. "Ivy, look, socks that match." Avery smiled without meaning to. She poured water over coffee grounds and realized she didn't have a bottle for Ivy that wasn't made for athletes. The fridge could feed a boardroom cold brew, takeout, meal kits labeled with dates, but there wasn't a single thing in it a baby needed. Not one. She glanced down the hallway. Lucas had dragged a spare blanket from the linen closet and turned it into a nest beside the guest bed. Ivy lay on her back in the center of it, hands in the air, grabbing it light like she could catch it. "Okay," Avery said to no one and shrugged into her parka. "I'll be right back." 10 minutes. She left a note on the counter with block letters big enough for 8-year-old eyes. "I'm getting things for Ivy. Do not open the door. Call me if you need." She drew a wonky sunflower in the corner, and for a second, it felt like a signature. The drugstore on the corner had not been designed for panic. Its aisles were too bright, its shelves too tall, and its inventory too complete. Avery pushed a red basket that squeaked and tried to remember anything she'd ever learned about babies that wasn't from a commercial. A clerk with kind eyes appeared at her elbow, like an angel who worked holidays. "First time?" she asked, nodding at the avalanche forming in the basket bottles. Wipes, sleepers with tiny foxes on the feet, formula she Googled twice before choosing. "Is it that obvious?" Avery said. "Only to people who remember." The clerk took the basket and started swapping things out. "This bottle won't leak. These diapers won't make you cry. And the purple blanket? Keep it. You'll need a soft one." Everybody does. 20 minutes later, Avery walked home hugging a bag of necessities against the cold, like a life she hadn't expected to carry. She opened the condo door and found Lucas exactly where she had left him, kneeling beside Ivy, concentrating on the serious task of making a baby giggle. "I brought reinforcements," Avery said. The purple blanket became a cape. The fox-footed sleeper earned a nod usually reserved for professional athletes. The bottle warm, finally, not guesswork, turned Ivy into a puddle of contentment in under 60 seconds. Lucas watched, shoulders loosening a notch. His body had forgotten how to loosen. Avery set her coffee on the counter and let herself breathe. One beat, another. On a shelf above the built-in desk sat a storage box she hadn't opened in years. She pulled it down and set it into the sunlight like an artifact. Inside, college photos faded a little at the edges. A sunflower pressed flat and stubborn between pages from a poetry class she'd loved and ignored. A letter with her own name on the outside in Jenna's chaotic handwriting. Her thumb hovered over the flap. She'd never read it. She'd told herself she would when she had a free afternoon that did not exist. She broke the seal now because time had become a person with opinions. "Avery," the letter began, "I'm terrible at saying the thing while it's happening, so here is the thing a little late. I didn't leave because I stopped loving you. I left because I loved you the way you love the sun far away and constant, and I didn't know where to stand, so it wouldn't burn me. If you ever decide to stand still, I'll be the idiot with the sunflower crown, waving you home." Avery swallowed the lump in her throat and tucked the letter into her pocket like a promise that finally had a place to go. Her phone buzzed on the counter, screen lighting with a number she didn't know. She let it ring. It went to voicemail. A voice filled the kitchen, thick, angry, familiar, in the way that bad weather is familiar. "This is Derek. "You've got my sister's kids. I'm coming for 'em. You can't keep them." The message ended like a slammed door. Avery stared at the phone until her reflection went soft. She opened her laptop, typed a short email to the board leave of absence. Effective immediately. Delegate to the CFO. Personal emergency. And pressed send with a hand that shook and then, miraculously, steadied. She crossed the room and crouched next to Lucas. "We're going to play a game," she said, voice calm. "The game is called We Only Open the Door for friends with snacks or badges. Can you help me win?" He choked out a laugh that might have been the first one of the day. "I'm good at that game." "Me too," Avery said. "Turns out I'm learning." That night, she stood in the doorway to the guest room and watched both kids sleep. Ivy's breath was a small metronome. Lucas had one hand flung over his head, like he'd fallen asleep mid-celebration. On the dresser, the purple blanket glowed in lamplight. On the floor, a new pair of fox feet pointed at the ceiling like a tiny victory. Avery didn't make many vows. She made one now, under her breath, to the room and the river, and whatever listened on cold nights. "I will not be the person who leaves again." She turned off the light and made the kind of decision that changes what comes next, the kind you don't announce, the kind you prove. Spring crept into Boston like someone easing open a door they weren't sure they were allowed to use. Snow melted in polite puddles at the edges of the sidewalks. The river loosened its jaw. On a Tuesday that didn't feel important until later, Avery drove the kids to a community garden plot wedged between a playground and a chain-link fence that tried and failed to look friendly. The soil was dark and stubborn. Lucas held a kid-sized trowel, like a knight holding a sword he fully intended to use for good. Ivy wore a floppy sun hat she hated and pulled off every 3 minutes with glee. "Okay," Avery said, dropping to her knees in jeans she'd stopped being precious about. "Mission briefing. These are sunflower seeds. They look like snacks, but they are not. They're promises. We put them in the ground, and if we're kind and a little lucky, they remember what they're for." Lucas nodded like he'd been waiting his whole life for something to be that simple. He pressed a seed into the dirt with the seriousness of a signature, then another, then one more for someone else. "What's that label say?" Avery asked, reading the popsicle stick he had written on in wobbling letters. "Lucas," he read, then pointed to the next, IVY. He held up a third stick with careful hands. "Mom." Avery's throat tightened. "Good. That's the one that grows the tallest." They planted one more together. "This one says Avery," Lucas announced. He pushed it into the ground with the authority of a judge and the joy of a kid allowed to be a kid. "Because you stayed." The sun warmed their backs. Somewhere, a dog barked at a pigeon with big dreams. Ivy squealed at a worm like she'd discovered a dragon. Avery laughed until something unclenched in her chest that had been clenched since. Before, weeks slid by like beads on a string. The city changed color. The fridge in Avery's condo turned into a gallery crayon rivers. Stick figures with wild hair. A sunflower whose petals were too big and exactly right. Nights had shapes now. Dinner that wasn't delivered. A bath that turned the bathroom into a rainstorm. 3 stories, always 3. Because 2 is for people who don't know math, Lucas explained. Avery sang lullabies badly. Lucas corrected the words. Ivy clapped because clapping was a language, and she was fluent. On a late afternoon that smelled like cut grass and decision, they returned to the garden and found green where there had been brown. Little spears shouldering up through the dirt. Lucas crouched, eyes wide. "They remembered," he breathed. "Of course they did," Avery said. "They're stubborn. Like you," he said. "Like your mother," Avery answered, and the sentence didn't break her anymore. It held her up. By July, the sunflowers were tall enough to gossip. Their faces followed the light like worshippers. Lucas stood between them with a hose that refused to behave and managed to soak everyone, including himself. Ivy laughed so hard she startled a sparrow. That evening, the 3 of them walked the esplanade together. not because the river owed them anything, but because it had seen the beginning and deserved the sequel. The sky performed one of those Boston sunsets that look fake pink poured into gold, the city doing its impression of hope. Lucas's hand found Avery's without looking. "Will you still be here tomorrow?" he asked, not like a test anymore, more like a habit he was trying to retire. Avery stopped and knelt, so they were the same height and the same decision. She pushed hair off his forehead and smiled in that way you learn when you mean it, and not when you're posing for someone else. "I will be here," she said, "for every tomorrow you want me." Lucas let out a breath that seemed to have been waiting since winter. Ivy slapped both palms against Avery's cheeks and squealed, which his baby for seconded. They kept walking until the light thinned and the city flicked on its lamps one by one. On the way home, they detoured past the garden to check on the names staked in the dirt. 4 sticks. 4 claims. Wind moved through tall stems that did not bend easily. Back in the kitchen, Avery propped a new drawing on the counter. It showed a house with too many windows, and a swing under a tree, and 3 figures holding hands, with a 4th in the sky, wearing a crown made of yellow petals. Someone had written U.S. across the bottom in letters that didn't quite agree on size. Avery touched the word with her fingertip, and then looked past the paper, too. The 2 real people in her kitchen, banging measuring cups together like cymbals. To the future, coming up the driveway like a friend. She flicked off the overheads and let the room keep the soft light, the kind that forgives. She lifted Ivy to her hip, reached for Lucas's hand, and turned toward tomorrow. The sunflowers outside turned their faces too. If this story found you, you're part of it now. Tell us where you're watching from, and subscribe to The Day Everything Changed for more stories like that. In each story, we plant a new promise, a reminder that love, protection, and second chances still grow here.